Great. So my name is Jake Riley, and today I'm going to talk about Flexdashboards, and in particular, like a debugging workflow that I've developed using this package that I wrote called Shinyobjects. I have two links here of like how you can follow along, and I'll go over those in two slides. But a little bit about me, as they mentioned, I work at Chop. My pronouns are he and him. I've built three big packages that two are on CRAN. One is Shinyobjects, which I'll talk about today. I also have a package called Simple Colors, which I use in some of the scripts that we'll look at today. And then I have a headliner, which is a work in progress, but pretty close to being released to CRAN as well. So all of these are really around data visualization and dashboarding. I'm also a very proud dog dad. That's Emma. She's 17 and a half years old. And on Twitter, I'm Yake84. All right, so to follow along today, I'd like to make it as interactive as I can. It's a little tough just being remote, but there's two ways that I put together here, and both these links are in the chat. So if you're able to, and if you have an RStudio Cloud account, you can follow along there. It's free to sign up. You can sign in with your GitHub account if you use GitHub. I think you can also sign in with Google, and then there's a project there with the number 1788351. You won't see that, but that's the URL for it. And when you open it, there'll be a button at the top that says Save a Permanent Copy. So you can save that, and then you'll have a workspace. You'll have like an exact copy of my script in my RStudio session. So it will look exactly like RStudio. It'll just be in the browser, but all the libraries that I'm using will be there. And if RStudio Cloud is not something you want to do today, the slides are on GitHub, and all of the scripts are as well. So we can do that. So before we get started, I just want to talk a little bit about the structure, because what I really want to show you is how Shinyobjects works. But to get there, I just want to make sure that folks kind of understand like why you would even use it. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what R and RMarkdown is, and a little bit about how to run R and RMarkdown with Shiny, and then I'll talk about Flexdashboards. After that, I'll describe this like Shinyobjects workflow that I've developed, and at the end, I'm just going to have some free time for folks to. There's some prompts of next steps for you guys to do to the dashboard that we'll be looking at. So the goal is, there'll just be some free time towards the end, and you guys can make some of those changes and hopefully take some screenshots and put them on this folder on Google Drive. And then at the end, we can reconvene. We can look at those images together, and I'll answer any questions. I'm also happy to answer questions at any time, so please use the Q&A link that's also in the chat. So what's out of scope for this talk is the tidyverse. So to make a dashboard, you usually do need to do some data manipulation to get the charts and the tables that you want. So I am doing a little bit of that just so that to make the dashboard a little more interesting. I'm not going to go through like what each of those steps are, but all of it comes from the tidyverse. So it's all using dplyr or tidyr and a little stringer and forcats. But it's all stuff that should there's like good tutorials for online if you want to like learn more about how each of those steps work. Yeah, and then I'm not really gonna go over Shiny proper, and what I mean by that is Shiny gets used in a couple of contexts. Shiny can be like the engine for a dashboard. So when I said that we'll go over using R and RMarkdown with Shiny, that's like one use of Shiny, but a lot of people develop what's called like a Shiny app. And when they do that, they're developing a UI script. So that's a user interface script that's describing like there's a drop-down box or a text box or some sort of interaction that the user is going to have with the dashboard. And then there's a server side, which is like, how's the dashboard going to respond to the user input. So there's, so Shiny, when I say Shiny proper, that's kind of like that app development, that dual script of the UI and app and server scripts. I'm not really going to go into that at all. I'm just going to describe, like how to implement Shiny on an R Markdown document and how you can turn that into a Flex dashboard. All right, so I'm going to switch gears for a sec and open up an R Markdown. All right, so in the, if you were able to download the repo, or if you have this open on RStudio Cloud, if you get into the folder called Workshop Flexdashboard Shinyobjects, Under that is a subfolder called R, and in that is going to be all the scripts that we'll use today. So all these ones that start as, so as Markdown on Shiny, and then as Flexdashboard. But before we can really get started, just make sure that you have the workshop.r project open. So if you just click on that, it will say, do you want to open this R project? And then the project will kind of like set our home base for all of our path directories. So when we read in our data set and stuff, it knows where to look. So you'll hit our project. I already did it, and it'll like show up here like that I'm in that project now. So so what's in R Markdown? Let me knit this real quick. But R Markdown is just a way to combine prose, so like text that is describing, yeah, like the kind of maybe the purpose of your analysis, or whatever it is you want your user to read, and then it also allows you to have chunks of code where you can do all the data manipulation, and you can hide that from the user when you it's called knitting. So you write all this in this layout. It uses Markdown, which is kind of a standardized language that gets used on a lot of platforms. So there's like a really specific way that that you write Markdown, and actually the latest version of RStudio has a nice new feature to have like a Markdown editor. So if you guys download that, it will, I think it's gonna be really cool to use. But okay, so this ran, let me just open it up. Yeah, so so if we compare the two here, I have the libraries that I'm going to use in my data set, and then I have a little text saying this data comes from the Sunshine Coast Council. So that is coming through here, and I wanted a link, so I use like this bracket and parenthesis to pop a link in here. And so what is this data set? This data set is pet names from a registry in Australia. And yeah, so I wrote a little text here about yeah, like what I want my user to know, and then I have some code to build the charts that I want. So first I just wanted to know like what are the top 10 names for female cats, female dogs, male cats, and male dogs. So yeah, so I just have a little section here where it ends up like it results in a data table. You can just click away from that, and then I have a little plot at the bottom where I just do a little data manipulation, put it into a ggplot, and then I call ggplotly on that ggplot object, and it makes like an interactive version of ggplot. It's really a nice library. So yeah, and that's it. That's like that's all the code it takes to build this document. So that's just a standard out of the box way that you might use an R Markdown document. So what is this Shiny aspect? So what I want to do is I want to add a button that's going to let me add a filter that's going to affect both the data table and Plotly. But before I describe how that works, I just want to kind of review some of the like key differences between a Markdown and then a Markdown where you start implementing Shiny. So let me go back to the presentation. All right, so this is the final dashboard that we're going to get to. Our middle step is going to just add a button to that last dashboard, and then the last step with the Flexdashboard is going to go from the R Markdown with Shiny to this dashboard. And it's actually not that many changes to get there. But the parts of this dashboard that are going to be new is these kind of these like new objects you have to make. So when I say UI, that's like the user interface. That's the stuff that the user is going to interact with to make to cause some response from the dashboard. So this is a button that is the age group of the animals in the data set. And so I've named it input age. And then I use input age to create what's called a reactive data frame. And I'm going to talk about that in the next slide, but a reactive data frame is just a data frame that's constantly listening to see what the user is selecting off of these buttons, and then it's updating itself constantly as the dashboard is running. So it under the hood it's treated like a function, so you always call it with these parentheses, but I'll walk you through kind of how we interact with the reactive data frame. But taking input age, to then filter my data, and then that filtered data is going to affect these, they call these value boxes. So it's going to update these value boxes, and then that filtered data is going to be what's underneath the top, like the top 6 pet names and the top breeds. Now, I also have a slider here called input n, and input n is going to allow me to control how many rows come back, or how many distinct fields are coming back. I know that it says 6, and this is 6, and this is more than 6, but this is one of the steps that I'll have you guys update as we get to like the exercise portion of the talk. Okay, so what is reactivity? So anything that is like static, like it's not changing, like you wrote, you know, like the today's date or something, that's static. Like it just needs to run one time in the dashboard to be useful, or to be accessible. But anything that you want to respond to, like a UI component, like a button or a text entry, is going to be reactive. So it creates, so when you run your dashboard, it like uses the Shiny server. It runs locally, but it uses the Shiny server, and it creates an object called input. And so based on what you wrote in terms of the UI components, like the slider input, text input, the group buttons, in each of those, I'm going to assign it to some item in this input list. So so input, so you can't name anything in your script input, because Shiny is going to create an object called input. And I think it will overwrite yours, or yours will overwrite it. But so input is like kind of a like a reserved name that is for Shiny. So the UI components that I'm going to build, I'm going to associate that with this input list that Shiny is going to reference, and then I'm going to use that. So like here, I'm creating radio group buttons with the age groups, and so in that is an argument that's input ID. So I'm going to say input ID equals, and then in quotes, I'm going to put age groups. And then I'm going to get a reactive data frame or a reactive plot where I'm going to use this reactive call around it. So I'm going to create a reactive, I'm going to call a reactive function. So I'm going to say filtered data is this reactive, is going to be reactive to the dashboard. So that means that filtered data is going to constantly be listening to the actions that the users are taking. So yeah, when I think about reactive, I think about it just in terms of like listening for user interaction. So I had in my radio group buttons, I create like the input ID for this set of buttons is called age group. And then in my filtered data set, I want to know, I want to filter this animals data set where the age group is in this input age group. So input age group is getting created when this gets created, when Shiny. So Shiny is going to run, it's going to see this group of buttons, it's going to create an input object, it's going to look at all of the input IDs from my UI elements and assign them to a list. And then that list is something that I'm going to be able to call with input $ X or Y or whatever it is. So in this case, it's input $age group. And then in my Plotly, I want to use that filtered data set, but I want to add a little extra and limit the list that comes back. So here I'm going to like access the input $n value that I made from that slider with the numbers. I think this can be pretty confusing, and this is all a lot of new stuff. So I'm going to review just a little more, and then I want to just pause for questions. But I do just want to call out that so most of the UI elements are going to be some sort of input, like slider input, text input, number input. There's a lot of these inputs. And then there's Shiny widgets, which has radio group buttons and a lot of great stuff. And there's links to that in the Flexdashboard document. Then when you want to create something, like you want to create objects that are listening for those user interactions, then you use all these render functions. So you'll say render text, or I use from Plotly. Plotly has a function called render Plotly. So I'll say render Plotly, and that just means I want to create a Plotly that keeps listening for a user input. So render Plotly is going to be pretty similar to the to just like a regular call for to make a plotly, but because I want to use this filtered data set, which is itself reactive, I have to call that with the parentheses. So I'll say filtered data with the parentheses. And then in my data manipulation, when I want to access the value of the slider, then I'm going to say input n. So factor lump is from the forecast library. It's a really nice function to just roll up the topmost, like the most frequent values in a vector, and then put everything else into an other category. So here I'm just saying like grab the top n breeds and then put everyone else into other. So then I just get like a much smaller, I get a much smaller list of unique values for breed in my data set. So it's really just to like roll up those factors into 10 or 15 or however many I pick, and then put everything else into other. And then in the title, I wanted to say of this plot, I want to say title is the age group that was selected. And then I use ggplotly just to pull that back. But for this to work, it needs to be inside our render plotly. So if I wasn't doing any reactive data manipulation in either a markdown with Shiny or a Flexdashboard, I could just call it as like P and then plotly of P, ggplotly of P. But because I want it to be reactive, I want it to be listening for the user, like what the user is doing, I need to put it inside this render function. So I feel like that's probably a lot to take in. I'm curious what questions you might have, or if anything has come through the Q&A.
Yeah, there's a question. In the example with the age group and n, why do we put the filtering with input age group in reactive, but then just directly use input n in the call to render plotly?
Yeah, so you could have stuff that is, sorry, I think I have another diagram. Let me move to the next slide and hopefully I can explain that a little more. So I just wanted to point out that it can get really complicated, because so you can have reactive stuff that's referencing reactive stuff that's referencing reactive stuff. And so even though I had input age groups and I had input n, I might not use both of them to build that reactive data frame. So we wanted to know like why filter data, I didn't use that as an opportunity to roll up breed. And it's, I could have rolled up breed there, but this is actually a like just a subset of the actual data manipulation I need to do, and I do a little more to reduce the number of rows. And so I don't necessarily need to deal with input n up here, but I could have rolled up breed up here. But I'm gonna use filter data like in other parts of the dashboard. So if I do want like the original breed to stay there, I just want breed to get rolled up in my plot. Well, then I just use input n for this factor lump when I'm making the plotly, when I'm creating that plotly object. But maybe like if I have like a part of my dashboard that's just a list of all of the pets, which we do have, and I want to see like, well, what is the breed of each animal without using that factor lump to roll them up, I wouldn't want to apply the input n then. So I hope that helps. So it can get really complicated. So here, this is just an example from work where so input provider was actually looking at the person's, it was looking at the login of the person who was signed in, and then that, depending on their role, they had to like pick a provider to look at. And then, so input provider was a dropdown to choose. That's going to create this selected provider object. Selected provider is now a reactive data frame, because this is a data frame. And so then I want to know like who is that person's peers. So this reactive data frame creates peers, and then I want to know what are the titles for the people in the same group as the person selected. So then I'm creating peers title, which is reactive to the peers object. And then I want to generate all these metrics and say, how does that user compare to everyone else with the same titles? So for instance, we group our CRNPs and our PACs together in one group. And so we want to know like, how is that group doing you know, on maybe like calling patients back after surgery versus, yeah, like the other people in that same group. Because we also might have metrics that are looking at people with an like different licensure, like an MD, or they might be like an athletic trainer or something. So so it can get really complicated, and I might use different pieces of those different inputs that I've created at different stages of these reactive objects that I'm making. And so part of the impetus of creating Shiny objects is just because it was getting really hard to debug something like this. This is a short little example, but there was probably like 20 reactive objects that were all interdependent on each other. And because that input object doesn't get created until the dashboard runs, it actually wasn't something that I was able to debug. But before I spend a lot more time on that, let's go look at an R Markdown example. Okay. So we talked about just a regular R Markdown. So then what is an R Markdown on Shiny? So there's just a couple of changes that we have to make. The first is we have to add this runtime Shiny up in the, this is called the YAML, yet another markup language. It's just this little section at the top of a Markdown. It was on our other one too. All R Markdown documents have what's called a YAML. And so in this YAML, we just need to add this one line that says runtime Shiny. So it just tells the dashboard, hey, when I launch this, when I hit run document, instead of knitting it, you're gonna stir up this like Shiny server. You're gonna stir up like a little Shiny session and run the dashboard that way. So it doesn't actually like create an HTML document. It just it will just create like a little dashboard for us. And then the other change I need to do is I need to get some input. So I'm just gonna uncomment some stuff here. So one thing that I did is I wanted to know, and let's actually read in our data, maybe look at that first. So I'm gonna use the tidyverse in DT, which is gonna give data tables. Data tables is not the data table that's like analogous to the tidyverse. Like this DT data table is just a really nice way of displaying tables that we use often at work. Okay, and then I have a little RDS file, just because it was a nice, easy way to save it. But yeah, I have this animals data set. So in the animals data set, I've got stuff like the species, the name, the specific breed, like a more primary breed, the color, whether they were spayed or neutered, the gender, the age of the animal, the locality, this is all from Australia, the age group, and then the year that they were born. And this, as I mentioned earlier, is just registration data from a county in Australia. So so with that, I want to create an input related to the age groups. So the first thing I want to do is just find like, what are those unique age groups? So it's 0 to 5, 6 to 11, 11 to 15, and 15 plus. This field is a factor. So I need to do a little more before we can use it in a UI object. So I want to just make sure that it's sorted. And then I just want to like make sure that it's coming through as a character. So I'm going to use that and create this age group object that has just those distinct values. Then what I want to do is I want to create what's called a radio group button. So that's in the picture I shared earlier. That was just the series of buttons where you can click through, and the user is gonna, yeah, click on those and the whole dashboard is gonna update. And so similar to what I was describing earlier, we're gonna set this input ID and we're gonna give it the name age group. So this means that when I wanna call this later, I'm gonna look for wrong keys. I'm gonna look for input $age group when I wanna figure out what the user selected there. I need to give it a couple more things. I just wanna make sure that the person knows what this field is about, so I'll give it a label. And then I use choices to set like what the unique options are of those buttons. And then I set a default value of like what is selected. So I took age groups, but I also combined it just with all. So I get a little vector of all and then the distinct age groups. And then it creates this radio group button. So this is where it starts to get hard to work with some of the Shiny stuff, is because, you know, we're really used to just, you know, highlighting this and saying Control Enter, and this isn't really a helpful output. So it just spit out a lot of HTML at me, and this kind of makes it hard for me to know what it's going to do. Like the only way that I can really figure out what's going to happen is if I run this document to see what it looks like. So I'll run that, and then I'll get these buttons. A lot of what it's doing over on the side here, if you like published to a server, like at work, we have a RStudio Connect is a server to like house all of our documents. It wouldn't spend as much time like doing this rendering. So it might be a little slow when I tell it to run documents because I'm doing it locally. But if you have it housed on a server, it should be faster. Yeah. So all I've done right now is I've just added this UI component, which is going to be those buttons. It's not doing anything. The dashboard's not like reacting to it yet, but this is what the buttons look like. Now, if I wanted to change the size of the buttons or the layout of the buttons, I really have to just keep hitting run document and see what it looks like, and run document and see what it looks like. And I have to keep doing that until it looks the way that I want. And I find that to be really challenging, especially when you're in like a proof of concept stage where maybe the data is too large, or like there's just like a lot of things that could really slow the dashboard down. So you have to like keep hitting run, wait for your dashboard to load, and then see what it did, and then like do it over and over again. And I found that to be really pretty frustrating. So so Shinyobjects is this package that I've been writing. And so what you can do it a couple different ways. So we could pipe Shiny objects view UI, and then if I run that, it actually creates a small little app of those buttons. So it's going to close after 5 seconds, but it's just a little preview of what those buttons are going to look like. So I can kind of keep making changes and say, well, what if I put like all on the other end? You know, what does that look like? I put it on the other side. So I can really play around here. I could change the colors. I could change like the size of like how big the buttons are. I could like make them vertical instead of horizontal. All of those are different parameters of radio group buttons. But Shiny, this like view UI function, is going to allow me to just really quickly see what came back. So you can use it a couple ways. You can pipe it on like I did here. You can, so a lot of times folks will hit this and like, oh, I don't know how to read that. So when this spits out, you can also just type it down there, Shiny objects, view UI, and then it will look at the last thing that was called, which was all that wild HTML, and then it will run it for you. Or if you just highlight the code, I would love to do a workshop on the RStudio API, but I use the RStudio API to go look. And so it's going to ask me just to make sure. It says, do you want to use the selected text from your source pane? So it's looking up here. It sees that I have text highlighted, and it just confirms that I want to run it, because it's going to, yeah, there's a lot of it asking for your permission before it does stuff, because Shiny Objects has the ability to like write to your global environment. So I just always want to be sure that it's doing what you want. So it's going to ask, do you want to use the selected text up in that pane? I say, yeah. I don't know that I've selected it anymore. I say, yes, I do. And then same thing, it'll like go build that app. So I think it's a really useful tool. I use this view UI function quite a bit. But I do just want to call out that Shiny Objects is really just for debugging. So Shiny Objects isn't something that's going to end up in your script. Like, you're not going to do library Shiny Objects and put that in your script. It's really just for the debugging for the developer, like in the console. Yeah, I don't see much utility of it outside of that. But yeah, hopefully it really helps, because that, like, we just saved so much time, right? I didn't have to keep running the document to see what my changes look like. Okay, but now we want to like deal with this reactive stuff, right? So we know that like the buttons are there, they look good to me. So how do we get like our data set to respond? So the first thing is we want to interact with that input that we created. And I'm putting this logic here just so that you have it. I'm hoping that the documents that we're going to review today are something that you can refer to over time. So, you know, you're coming back to this, you're like, oh, how do I do that? I was hoping to put stuff in here that might solve some of those use cases. So one of the big challenges is it's really nice to have the all option, but all isn't a age group in my data. So what do I do if the user picked all? Like if they picked 0 to 5, that's nice, because 0 to 5 was one of the values in the age field. but all is not. So like, what do I do with all? So one thing you can do is just say, I want to start with my animals data set and then filter for when age group. So the age group column in my data set is in the age group selected, or the age group is all. So and it will look for either condition and then bring back the appropriate data. So yeah, this is just a common one that trips people up and they spend a lot of time on Stack Overflow. But an easy way to figure out if they picked all or not is to say either it's like one of the selections or it's all. So use that. So right now, if I run this, it's going to say input's not found, because input doesn't actually make it into our code, right? Like input is something that Shiny's going to run when we run the app. So it again makes it kind of hard to run. So for us to really see if this data manipulation takes place, we have to do two things. First, we have to add this step to create that filter, but we also need to wrap it in one of those listeners. So in this case, it's because my final result is a data table, I need to use render data table. So for a reactive data table, I need to just put it in a render data table. So so with this, I can run it and see how it works, and run it and see how it works. But that also makes it kind of challenging, because again, if the dashboard isn't really optimized yet, or your data steps aren't optimized, it could really slow you down to do a lot of this back and forth iterating. So this is where Shinyobjects, I think, really shines, if you'll pardon the pun. All right, so what Shinyobjects does is, again, we're going to call it in the console. So there's only three functions. There's view UI, which we just talked about, and then there's load reactive objects, and then convert selection, which is just like a smaller version of load reactive objects. So load reactive objects is like the meat and potatoes of the Shinyobjects package. So I'll just say load reactive objects. I just always make sure that your script is saved, because it's going to go look at it. So I say load reactive objects. It says like which environment do you want to use. So you can specify when you call it to use the global environment, but you can also you could also like save. I'm going to skip over that. I just want to make sure that it goes to the global environment, because I want to like create something that I can interact with. I want to be able to interact with that input object. So Shinyobjects is going to create an input object that I'm going to be able to react to. So I say, yep, I want you to interact with my global environment. And then it says, do you want to use the file that's currently in your source pane? You can say yes. You can also choose to find it in the browser, or like open a little browser. And then it says, okay, here's some inputs that I'm using. So it went and looked for every time that I used input in my script, and it and then it identifies whether or not I've like accounted for it. And what I mean by accounted, this is part of the Shinyobjects workflow. So what it wants is, it says, add this code chunk to your R Markdown. So it just gives me the little printout of what I need to put in my R Markdown. So I always put this at the top of my script. And so I'll paste it in. And actually I already had it up here, but yeah, so I am just going to create this little dummy list that mimics what the inputs my user is going to like the type of values my user might select when they interact with input age group. So this is sitting inside a chunk that's called says eval equals false. So this doesn't actually run when my dashboard runs. So when I said earlier, like you don't want to have any object called input in your script, because Shiny is going to make an input object. Putting this inside something that's eval equals false means that it's available to you, but it doesn't actually run when your dashboard runs. So so Shinyobjects looked through my code, and then it said, yeah, I'm using this input age group. It gave me a little recommendation of how to like start creating an input object to debug, and it gave me the code to do so. So I just had to fill in like a example value of what an input age group could be. So if I run this, input's now a list. So now I can call input age group and it'll bring back that 0 to 5 value. So now, if I go back to my data table, I can say, all right, what do I get if I run animals? What is age group? That what if this? So like now I can actually interact with that input value and troubleshoot without having to keep launching the application, because that's like most of what makes Shiny kind of tough, is that it's really hard to debug. You have to like kind of keep rerunning the app over and over to see what the changes, how the changes you made, like kind of how they look. So yeah, so now that I have this like dummy object, I can just treat this like a regular script. So I can just say, yeah, I could create this df object. They went and did that, and then I can just run this like data table object that also runs. So even though this is a reactive, it's like sitting in this reactive value, I can debug the guts of it by creating that dummy input object. So I just want to call out real quick, anytime you use these brackets, that kind of like a curly brace, it kind of creates like its own little script. So you might have noticed that I was just hitting Control Enter while I was inside here, and it wasn't yelling. And what I mean by yelling is if I run the whole thing, it'll say, it'll just say weird stuff like shiny render, or it'll say like you're not in a reactive context. Like if you try to run some of these like shiny functions or these like render functions, you don't really have access to seeing what they look like. But if you use the curly braces, that allows you to do like multiple steps inside those curly braces. So the first step is I want to create a df object, and this exists just when this render data table is called. So df doesn't actually make it out into my global environment. It's just kind of internal to it generating my data table. But because I'm debugging, I'm happy to go in there and like put it in my global environment. So yeah, so I can run that and see what it looks like, and then I can run data table and see what it looks like. And I know that render data table is gonna be responsive, so I don't really need to like debug that. But this is just like a really nice way to make sure that the different things that the different options that your users might be selecting off of the UI of your dashboard like work the way that you want, rather than having to like launch the dashboard and like select all the different options and then run the dashboard and select all the different options. You can just create this dummy input object and then just iterate over it like right in the console. So I'm gonna I'm gonna save this, or I could just say run. So I'll run this and we'll see what happens. I'm using this glue function, which when glue was first explained to me, I didn't really get it. It just seemed like another version of paste, but it's actually a pretty cool function. So I would definitely suggest learning about glue. But this is like how I'm able to like write the name of the cat and then like the size of the group for other cats with the same name. Yeah, but so now I have these buttons are affecting what's showing up in my data here. So if I click on these different buttons, so like there was 37 female cats named Luna, there's 244 dogs named Bella. There's way more dogs in this data set than cats. Yeah, so Luna, Bella, and then in this age group, it's Bella and Bella. This age group, Bella, Bella, Charlie, Max. You'll see, like, as we go through this, that Bella is the most common name of female animals in Australia, which is just kind of funny to me. So great. So like our data frame is updating, but our chart so far is not. So now we need to figure out how to get our chart to also react. So pretty similar to before, like we're just gonna add a little logic for it to filter on those conditions, because we have that input age is like a dummy object. And then I can run, when this runs, it'll inside render plotly, it'll like make a little p object, and then I'll call ggplotly and it'll print it out for me. So this is with that data filtered. And then because I need it to be reactive, I then need to put it inside the render plotly function. So now if we run this, So now if I change these objects, my data is changing as well. The breeds are kind of consistent across ages, but this is going to 2000, where if I said all, it's going up to like 30 or 5,000, because these are just the top 10 names or something. Yeah, so that's how you go from a R Markdown to an R Markdown utilizing a little bit of Shiny. What questions are coming up? All right, just chime in if any questions pop up. Yes, I hear someone on mute.
Sorry, there's one question.
Yeah.
What was it? When you have a cascade of reactive variables, one depending on another, do you have to be careful which one you call first?
You actually don't, which is a little surprising. Yeah, all of the reactive stuff is like constantly listening. So you can put them at the beginning of your script, the end of your script, it doesn't really matter. That's a really good question. It doesn't, I don't think that matters. Some things, if you really need like one to take effect first, you can use something called observe, where you can say like, keep an eye on this thing, and if that thing changes, then make an update. So yeah, if you have two things that are like looking at each other, so it would like otherwise create like a circular dependency. I think it will like still run, but it might not run in the way that you want it to. So you can do some stuff to kind of figure to kind of force when it looks at what to update itself. But for the most part, it doesn't matter where you put the reactive elements in relation to the rest of your code. Flex dashboards. I love Flex dashboards. I don't know why Flex dashboards aren't more popular. I think that the learning curve is so much lower than trying to learn kind of that native Shiny that I was talking about earlier, where you have to like create this like UI script and a server script. And if you've ever like tried looking for help on Shiny, a lot of it, or of, yeah, like this kind of reactive stuff, a lot of it is in that, it's almost like a dialect of R, you know, the Shiny syntax can be really hard to read, but the Flex dashboard reads mostly like an R Markdown, and it uses a lot of the structure of R Markdowns to create these dashboards. So I really like them, and I hope by the end of tonight you'll consider them as well. But similar stuff to the last step, you know, we need that runtime Shiny. There's a little more in my YAML now. Most of this is aesthetic. There's links at the bottom of this document of, you know, kind of how to update the YAML. There's like a whole Flex dashboard guide. It's really helpful. That's most of where I learned how to use Flex dashboard. But I need quite a few more things, because there's some stuff I'm doing to make the dashboard like look a little nicer. So I'm bringing in a couple more libraries. So one thing that we're going to make, I'm just going to pull up this slide again. Sorry, it's down here. Oh, yeah. Yeah, so this is the dashboard that we're hoping to make. So I have some value boxes. Those are coming from Flex, from the Flex dashboard package. I'm like adding these commas to the big numbers. That's coming from the scales package. Yeah, it's like just a couple of things that I'm doing to kind of change the aesthetics, and those are some of the packages that I'm referencing in this document. Yep. I also want to keep stuff about dogs blue and things about cats to be teal. So I'm just setting up at the top that these are two objects that I'm gonna call again. So there's color dogs, color cats. I'm just putting this here so that you have it. Data table is a very nice function, but there's usually like all these little tweaks that I like to add. I didn't have time to go through and document like why I picked all of these steps, but I put it into this function called nice data table. So for a lot of my projects, I just plop this function at the top of my script, and then every time I call a data table, I use this version, which has like just slightly nicer aesthetics. Like you might have noticed that like there's these buttons on the data table. Like when we called it earlier, we didn't have those, but now you could say like export a CSV or an Excel or a PDF. So yeah, there's just like some, those are some like nice features. So I'm calling it nice data table, and it's just a like a cleaned up version. This step we already saw. So we had like creating the age groups, and we created the that age group input. But now we also want to create a slider input. And I'm doing a little changes, like I'm making it vertical instead of horizontal. I like picked the width of it so that it like filled in the space a little more. But now I want to like create this slider input object, which is this guy, the slider input, and then I'm going to create a filter data object, because I'm actually now going to use this data all over the place. So when I was showing the example before, when we were just doing just two small things, we were just, you know, doing a quick little filter on the data for the data table and a quick little filter on Plotly. It's like not that big of a step, so I didn't mind like just dropping it in as one of the steps in this dplyr pipe. But because I'm now going to use it all over the place, I am going to create a reactive data frame. So the reactive data frame just uses the reactive function, and inside that I just put the steps to create that reactive data frame. So reactive is going to look at age group, and if age group isn't all, then it's going to filter for it. Otherwise, it's just going to return. It's just another way of like the other one. I just wanted to put both here so that you knew that there's different ways that you can get at if all was selected or a specific value. So yeah, this is usually the method that I go with, but both this or that other method of filtering they're both going to work just fine. Because usually there's like other steps of like, well, if this was selected and that was selected, you know, usually there's like more logic than just one input. But yeah, so I'm going to create this filtered data object, and then I'm going to call that at different stages in the dashboard. Like I want the number of pets to update if when I select the age group. So if I select 0 to 5, I should get a certain number of pets, and if I select 15 plus, I should get a different number. So that's what the first value box is going to show. And I'm just gonna, I'm gonna stay here for a sec. So what gets hard about this is I can run this line. I can, you know, hit Control Enter and get that. It had no trouble creating that object and putting it over here. But if I try to call it, I try to call filter data, it's going to say like, hey, you're not in reactive context. You don't have access to like making this. And that makes it pretty hard to debug, right? Like now we're back in the scenario where you have to like keep launching the app to see what the changes are. So this is where we're going to use Shinyobjects again. So I'm going to just uncomment this section here. Oh, not that. Let's do this. All right. So similar to before, I'm going to call Shinyobjects. And I'm going to do load reactive objects. I'm just going to clear this out for a sec. It's always a good idea to like clear out the environment, because sometimes like folks do a lot of like little tweaks and then they have something in their environment that actually isn't in their script. So always clearing out the environment is like a good way to kind of start from scratch. So load reactive objects is going to look through all of my code. It's going to load all my libraries. It's going to find this dummy input list and make that for me. It's going to load the libraries. It will find all my assignments. So see animals. It'll see color dogs, it'll put all that over here. But then it's going to deal with that like that error we just got about like not being able to deal with the reactive data frame. So under the hood, it's going to do some manipulation to make that an object available in our environment. So I'm just going to run load reactive objects to show you what I'm talking about. I'm going to say, yep, put in my global environment, and then yep, use my use the file in the source pane, and then it's going to go through all of my code. And then it put a lot of stuff in my environment. So yeah, it's really it's important that it asks you to do that, because if you had something called animals that was not this data set, it would overwrite it. So I do just want to caution to like make sure that it does what you want. Yeah, so it like went through and ran the different steps. I don't know why it's saying that it didn't run the color dogs, and I don't know. Let me see. Okay, this should be fine. Right. I don't know why they didn't run, but now they're available. But so now I have a lot of things. I have the input list. It like found that dummy input section, and even though I tell it not to evaluate when it actually runs, Shinyobjects says, hey, look for things like that, and then like bring them into the environment. So it looked for this dummy input, and then it found that filter data, and it under the hood kind of changed what it does. And now if I call filter data, it knows it's like has those parentheses because it's a function, but now it actually is a function and it just returns the data frame. So now filter data is an object I can interact with locally, and I don't have to like keep launching the dashboard to see what happens. When I ran load reactive objects, it was a little talkative about some of the inputs I'm using. So now it's saying, you know, here are the inputs you've listed. It says that I'm using age groups on lines 97 and 98, and I'm using input N on these two lines, and then it says, you know, update your code with this guy. So I'm just going to copy that, and I'm going to put that up here, and I'm going to give it the value of 5. So now my input list, I have both of those now, so I can say input N just as well as input age group. So that's like, to me, like the big strength of Shinyobjects. Like it looks for these things in your code, like the inputs. It looks for all of your libraries, all the objects you're using, and then it looks for these things that are reactive and otherwise like inaccessible while you're at the console, like trying to debug, and it puts them over in your environment so that they are, they're objects that you can interact with and see how they're affecting your code or your dashboard. I'm going to talk through just like some of the steps that are in the dashboard, but what I'd like to do is kind of let you guys see if you can figure out how to turn some of these objects into reactive objects. So value box is on itself something you can call and have it be static. So if I just say, you know, I've got this sterile field for the animals. This is if they're spayed or neutered, because it's a logical variable. It's trues and falses. R knows that it can treat it as 0, 1 integer, and because 0 and 1 is, yeah, with the 0s and 1s, I can then just like call mean, and mean will give me the proportion, and then I'm just going to use scales. What you mean to select that far back? Scales has this % function where, although it came in as a decimal, it will go ahead and like put the % sign on it for me. So it's just like a nice quick formatter for you, so you don't have to like paste and add all that together. But you know, if I just want this to be static and just say, you know, regardless of the filters, I want to know what proportion of the whole data set is spayed or neutered, I don't need to make this reactive. I could just call it as value box and it will come back always reading 92%. But if I want it to be reactive, then I have to throw it inside one of those render functions. So this one is just counting the number of pets in the data. And so I'm inside these curly braces, so I can do like a couple steps if I need to. So the first step I want to do is just do that filtered data. So now I have this df object, which returns my data. And then, now I'm calling, instead of the number of rows in animals, now I'm calling the number of rows of this df object. I could also just put filter data right in here, but I just wanted to kind of explain the curly braces. And then now I can call that, and it will spit out the HTML. The value box does not look well when I use View UI, so I'm not going to run it, but because it's just going to say 92 on the screen. I mean, I can do it. Let's see, View UI. Yeah, because the value boxes don't really show up, but it's just a little box with the value 23, 5, 6, 7. So that's how I make a reactive value box. So I have a couple steps like this, and what I'd like is for you all to turn some of these into reactive objects instead of static objects. So on, if you click the little navigation symbol, it will show you the layout of my dashboard. And throughout are different sections where I'm expecting it to be reactive. So let me actually just talk a little more about the structure of a Flexdashboard. So it's pretty similar to an R Markdown, but there's a couple key differences. Let me run this first. So one is that we can add pages. I'm just going to put these next to each other. So one thing that's new while it's running is I use this sequential equal signs, and these create pages. So there's 3 pages in the dashboard. There's a page called stats. There's a page called Bella's, which is all of the pets named Bella, because there's a lot of them. And then there's a page called Your Turn with some like follow-up instructions. I think it ran. Yeah. Let's see. So yeah. So to create these up here, I'm going to use these equal signs. Sidebar is like a special call that you can make in your dashboard. So we're going to see these. So just like we have the consecutive equal signs, you can use these consecutive lines to create like sections of your dashboard. So this dashboard at the very top is like splitting up into rows. So what those lines mean. Sorry, I'm just trying to bring this back up. So what the lines mean is like new section. So there's like a special section that you can get called sidebar, and it always, I think on Flexdashboards, goes to the left. And so you can just call .sidebar. I wanted to change the width. I think the default's like 300 maybe, but I want it to be 220. So I just did this little thing to change the width. And then it creates a sidebar over here. And then now everything underneath that, like these consecutive lines, are going to be in that sidebar. So I had like the different UI that I wanted. So I had the radio group buttons and the slider input. And then I had, I just moved from like our original Markdown, like that text at the top, I just moved it down to the bottom. So now it says the data comes from the Sunshine Coast Council. I'm also just going to point out that there's a little link here of a demo analysis from someone else. That's how I found the data set. So you can always check there to see other results folks found in the data. And then I want to start creating some like containers. So I'm saying to create a row, which is this guy, this up at the top, which are the value boxes. So yeah, I'll like make a row of height 100, and then I use these triple hashtags to indicate like new breaks along that row. So I'm saying like make a value box of registered pets that's here. Then I use the triple hashtags again to say, all right, now make another one. And then I grab like the spayed and neutered, and then I do triple hashtags again to get the cats, and then once more to get the dogs. So however many you have, it will equally space them across. There are ways that you can control the width of them, but in general, it just equally spaces stuff as you keep adding those triple hashtags. So that will make our row of the four value boxes. Then I have another row, so that's down here. And then in the first hashtag, I have our data table. And then the second hashtag, the triple hashtag, I've got the top breeds. So that's kind of the structure of these. And then I've got a tab called Bella's, which is just a data frame of all of the Bellas, because there's like almost 1,000 of them. And then I have some steps here that's called Your Turn. So there's some things that need fixing. So not all of the value boxes are currently reactive. The top names, I think, I gotta think about that one. The plot needs to be reactive. You might, if you have time, like put a put a toggle to say pick cats or dogs. So similar to how we have the age group, you could maybe see if you could get filter data to be reactive to a toggle called species. So input species, and that would toggle between cats and dogs, or cats, dogs, and all. So those are some of the suggestions I have to kind of like dig around on the dashboard a little bit and see if you can make some changes. Again, I know that I'm not doing a big overview of all the data manipulation, but I tried as best I could to just highlight like where the changes need to happen. So some of those steps are to make the value boxes reactive, so that's these guys, and then like the plot needs to be reactive, so it's currently always pulling back 10, so we need to make this something that is going to be reactive. Yeah, and then I just have some options towards the end of yeah, like some changes you can make, and there's also some, yeah, like these are just additional ideas. Like these are ones that I hope folks can get to, and then if you have more time, these are like other steps you could consider doing. I'm going to post a little poll where there's some questions that once if you've been able to make some of those changes, you hopefully can answer some of these questions. And then I would like for you all to like poke around a little bit and try to make some of those changes. And if you do go through and like change the theme or change it to a tab set, or make a different chart, or just playing around, I have a folder on a Google Drive where you could just drop screenshots. So if you're able to, it'd be cool to see folks use that. And this is quite a lot. For the most part, I think that Flexdashboard reads like R Markdown. The big change is really just that that input $, object, and then the render. So I think Shinyobjects is really what's going to help you work through that. So if you don't have Shinyobjects, if you downloaded the code off of the repo and you want to use it, it's on CRAN, so you can do install packages Shinyobjects. And if you are using RStudio Cloud, it's already installed there. So you can just call Shinyobjects : and then pull the functions you need. Or you can say library. It's something that just runs for you locally. So it doesn't end up, library Shinyobjects doesn't end up in your scripts, but yeah, it's just like a debugging tool. So yeah, you can call library Shinyobjects and then like use the view UI, use the load reactive objects. We didn't talk about convert selection, but convert selection is, if you keep making updates to filter data, you can just highlight it and say convert selection, and it will like update the filter data to be like that new iteration. So it's just like a quick way to update a little section of code to get that change in your global environment. Okay. I'm sure there's questions, so I'm all ears.
The reactive within reactive create multiple sliders for each reactive.
Say it again.
Can the reactive within reactive create multiple sliders for each reactive?
Do you mean like, can one reactive object dictate what another reactive object does? Because if that's the case, yeah, you can. So just like we've got render, like render value box, or render text, or render plot, render table, render data table, there's render UI. So if you need your, if you need the slider itself to be reactive, you would put this inside a render UI. And then render UI will like keep waiting to listen to see what happened up here to then influence what options are available in the slider as the user selects stuff. I hope that that's the question they were asking.
Yeah.
Okay.
Another question. Am I missing anything if I use Flexdashboard? Is there any functionality that is available in one but not the other?
You mean Flexdashboard versus Shiny?
Yeah, I think so.
So the biggest benefit is speed. So that traditional Shiny way of writing, they call it an app instead of a dashboard. not exactly sure why, but I'm sure that there's a technical reason. But that like way of writing Shiny apps is just faster. So if speed is something that's really affecting your users, you might consider using Shiny. But I didn't have time to go all into it. But instead of Shiny, we could have also done Shiny pre-rendered, and that requires a couple of additional steps to this document. And Shiny pre-rendered will also be much faster. So the biggest downside is the speed. The only other difference that I've really found, or there's two more differences that I found. So it's called Flexdashboard because the object is responsive to the size of my screen. So if I like made it real skinny, it will like rearrange itself to fit this layout. Or if I like make it the size of a mobile phone, it will also reorganize itself. So the flex about it is really that it like the containers are flexible in how they're going to get arranged depending on the size of the browser that the user is using. So if you want your dashboard to always be like 700, a height of 700 pixels and a width of 1,000 pixels, I haven't figured out how to get Flexdashboard to do that yet, but maybe it's possible, I don't know. But it's very easy to do in Shiny. So in Shiny, you could say, yeah, like set the dimensions of my app. The other thing is this thing, the sidebar, I think you can make it, I think you can do stuff to like hide it and collapse it. And I think there's more control of what you can do in the sidebar. Other than those, I haven't been convinced that that Flexdashboard is missing something that Shiny can do.
Okay. And side question, we're having some trouble accessing the Google Drive. There seems to be.
Okay. Okay. Let me see. I can play around with that. I did set the permissions to everybody. I'm curious. It looked like when I clicked on it, there was like something. There's like a sharing at the end. Maybe if you drop that off the URL. I think I know what's going on. I'll work on that as like we break for folks to dig around a little bit, and I'll post in the chat when it's working, hopefully. Anything else?
Yes. When, if ever, do you switch from using reactive to setting up reactive values?
Reactive values, honestly, I haven't really used it much, but reactive values is essentially like a list that you can interact with. Unfortunately, I don't think I haven't used it enough to give like an informed response. Great. I have another copy of the link. I'm going to see if that works instead. Trying to get back to the. I'm having trouble getting back to the chat. Oh, here it is. Okay. All right. Well, yeah, I'd like to just take a break, maybe grab a drink of water or what have you, and then hopefully just start digging around on the flexdashboard.rmd doc and see if you can convert some of those currently static objects to be reactive. If you're able to, I'd love to see, yeah, the changes you've made in the folder, which I'll share the link in a sec. Thanks.
So just a quick announcement then, if we are breaking, I allowed people to unmute themselves. So as you're working through this, if you want to ask questions, feel free to unmute yourselves. And I also allowed all participants to share their screen. If that is something that where you need help and you want to share some of the code you're struggling with, you can do that as well. So just know that those options are available.
Thank you. I hope that the link works, but not positive. I'm gonna share a poll. So if you're able to answer some of these questions with the changes to the dashboard, I'd love to see your answers.
Jake, are you there to answer a couple more questions?
Sure am, yeah. Hello?
Yep. I had a question on the, in the value boxes, you have the icons like a paw and hand scissors.
Yeah.
How do I find those so I can add different ones?
Good news, bad news. Good news, at the bottom of the script is some code to help you find that. Bad news is I couldn't get a cat or a dog to appear. So maybe don't spend too much time on that. But in theory, it's possible. I couldn't figure it out. Sorry. So at the very, very bottom of the Flex dashboard, there's a custom function for finding the font awesome icons. The oldest Bella is not reactive, so you could find the answer to that question on the dashboard as is. All right, everyone. I'd like to check in and see how folks are doing. I'm curious what kind of obstacles came up for people.
Anyone want to speak up or put in the chat?
I know it's a lot of pressure when there's like 20 people on the call, but I'm sure other folks, yeah, probably had similar sticking points. But yeah, the Bella tables. It would. Do you want me to give the answer, Alice? How to do that one? Okay. Yeah. So that was one of the like if you had extra time to get the Bella tables to be table to be reactive. So you could use the same type of logic that we're using for the ranking. So you would need to put it inside a render data table. And then instead of, I'm just trying to pull that up here. Instead of starting with animals, you would start with the filtered data object that we made. I think that's all you would need to do for that one. How do you call the shiny toggle? So you could just use the same type of buttons that we used for the ages. I called it a toggle, but the buttons would have worked. There is a toggle in Shiny-Widgets that's really just like on off, but maybe toggle wasn't the right word for me to use. But just something to select the different options. I don't know if Shiny inherently has a toggle, but Shiny-Widgets definitely does. Okay, yeah, so the nice data table function, it's only showing 10 rows. That part is curious to me. I might not have a quick answer on that.
Hi, this is Addison. I don't know if you can hear me.
Yes, yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I can definitely tell that the picker input is working and it's interactive. So you can select cats, dogs, or all. And it says, for example, for dogs that there are 886-ish rows. So I think it works, but it's just the display's a little funky. But that's a nitpicky thing. Like I can just look at the documentation. So. Yeah,
so the big piece in nice data table is I think line 57, which is scroller Y, which is setting the height. So right now it's defaulted to I gave it a height of 300. So you might be able to make that a dynamic variable instead. So you can change the height depending on where you're using it.
Okay.
I would try that. You also might try putting the triple hashtags on top of it. I'm not sure or not. Data table is one of the trickier. It's the nicer table, I think, but it's also the trickier table. So if you think of like in the dashboard, you can kind of see that there's like boxes around each of those areas. So they call that like a container, and the data table doesn't always want to stay in its container. Like, I don't know, I always have trouble, like that one, when it doesn't want to fit the right size, can be troublesome to debug. So I wish I had more positive help on that. But yeah, data tables can be tricky getting them to fit the container correctly.
Okay, well, thanks. I'll take a look at it. I did add the triple hashtags, so I'll.
Okay, yeah. Are you able to share a screenshot? I think it'd be cool to see how you added the picker input.
Yeah, it's in the Google Drive.
Oh, okay. Oh, I saw it. Yeah, I don't know who submitted what, or maybe the screen's too small. Maybe I do. Let's see. cool. I will bring this over. So we've got, oh, there it is. Just trying to pull it up on the screen here. Oh, okay, yeah. So this is where I was saying like the container can get wonky. When you do two rows like that, where you have like one row for the picker and then one for the data table, I think then I don't know. I feel like the formatting of like the size of the two containers just takes some back and forth like debugging. Data, like it works a lot better if you're able to put the input on like in a sidebar, like then data table will respect its boundaries, but otherwise like data table just kind of jumps around in size. So that would probably be the easiest way to fix it, but it is nice having it up at the top there, and then you can like get the whole width of the table. But yeah, the scenario you have here is when I noticed the most trouble.
Okay, yeah, I can change it to a sidebar.
Okay, and then Alice, you made some changes here. If you are open to talking about it, I'd love to hear about it. Otherwise, I can comment on it.
Oh yeah, this was my best attempt. I
Great.
changed the colors to the two colors that I learned about from my coworkers. And then I made the second, what's that called? Value box into a GG plot. But yeah, I don't actually know if that part's right.
Oh, that one was just, yeah, I mean, just put anything there, just like, just substitute it out. Yeah, so the changes you made, could you tell us like what you changed in the code, like what,
yeah,
where you made your changes?
So I changed at the top, all I did was I changed the theme for one. So in the YAML, you can change, I think this is the theme Space Lab. And then I changed the variables for color_dogs and color_cats. And I'm using goldenrod 2 and Dodger blue 3. I added the button for selecting the species, but you should note that it is not functional.
Okay.
But I added the button. Yes, yeah. Exactly. It's all about appearances.
Yeah.
And I think I added another image of the error that I got when I tried to do more.
Oh, you added another image? Ooh, nice.
So I have to work on this.
Yeah, so something in the filter is yeah, so it looks like filtered data. There's something just odd in the filter line.
Yeah,
I
it's
think what might
suboptimal.
be, I think what might be, did you do the filter like the one I did in the markdown where I said either the age group is in input age or the age group input age is all? Did you do it that way, or did you
Oh no, I think Amy may have been in the chat. She may have gotten the same error. I was trying to filter the species, and it looks like I might have just put in something that was not a term, and so it was returning nothing.
Ah, okay. I would still expect it to just return 0. Oh, you know what I think might be happening is that it returns 0 rows, and then the additional data manipulation, it can't do it. But
well, it's not subtle. I'll give it that.
Yeah. Yeah. Very good. Yeah, I thought you were using the cerulean theme. That's why I wrote that to you in the chat. But
I know, and I was like, that would have been a smarter plan. I learned something.
Oh no, I just I thought that was the color scheme, but it looks good. Yeah, Space Lab. I haven't used that one. Anyone else hit a snag that that we could discuss? And the poll, let's see. Where's the poll? Okay. So we have one Border Collie and a Labrador, most common suffix of A, and then 385 and 650. Okay, so let's see, the answers that I came up with, and maybe I could have done something wrong. Let's see. So for the oldest Bella, that one didn't actually need to be reactive. We could just, because this is all Bellas, so we could just sort by age. And so the first is a Labrador. Okay, so the oldest Bella is a Labrador. All right, the most common stuff. This was a hard question to write, but it was like the question I most wanted to ask. Okay, so if you were able to get the number of results, this like input n selector to work, and you brought it past 13, you would notice that all the ones in 13 end with ly. So we got Lily, Tilly, Billy, and Diesel. So that was the top 13. And then how many cats are over 15? So for this one, it was pointed out that it didn't, well, the value says 15 plus, but it looks like when I made the made this field, I oh yeah, sorry, I'm reading Trang's comment in the chat. Yeah, I meant 13th place. Okay, so how many cats are 15 plus? So I was just expecting to hit the 15 plus, and the up at the top they would update, and we would see that we had 385 cats. So that was the poll. Okay, Michael. All right, I think I hit a snag when I put this for work. So when you say shut down your server, do you have?
So I thought this was a great example, great enough that I wanted to have them put it on the Shiny server that another team is developing. And part of me's like, oh wait, they know nothing about all this Flex dashboards and all this other stuff. Will they need to shut down the server in order for it to use this dashboard and then install the required packages?
I don't think so. I think the administrator can install at any time.
Okay, they are the administrators. Okay.
Yeah, so you can just say, I need this. Well, actually, I'm trying to think. I think that I think when you have a server, so we use RStudio Connect at work, and when we go to make it accessible to other people, we hit this guy that looks like a little blue hurricane, and then you in it ask you like where to publish it. So you can publish it to the server, and then it takes its sweet time to actually deploy it. And the reason it takes its sweet time is because it like packages up the dashboard. So I think it packages up the packages with it, but I'm not positive. Almost like Packrat. I could be wrong, but I don't think it's using the server's version of those packages. I think it packages it up itself. But I would double check. Great. Anything else you were hoping I covered that I didn't cover?
Yeah, there's a question. Could you say a bit more about the difference between glue and paste functions?
Between what?
Glue and paste functions.
Oh yeah, happy to talk about that. Okay, so also, yeah, okay, so glue. All right, so if I had like, I don't know, let me just bring in, and I brought in today, and then I said, I don't know. So I have two objects here. I've got current date and next week. So if I was to paste these, I might say something like paste current date. Well, I guess we could use the separator. Next week, or let's make this a little more complicated. Data spans. All right, so we get something like this down here where we did that. But if we were to use glue, we could just say glue, and then we can just put it all together. So we can say the data spans, and then use these curly braces. You can just keep typing. You don't have to like stop your you don't have to stop your quotes to break for the extra stuff. So you just like that. So it just, yeah, it allows you to like string a bunch of stuff together without having to stop and exit the to exit the quotes. You can also so anything inside the curly braces is its own, like it will run R inside there, so you can or like it will like evaluate. So you could do something like for month. Oh, that's not the function. It's for date. So now it like floored the month inside there. I don't like to put a lot of stuff in there. Like if I was going to do anything more than this much manipulation, I would store it outside and bring it in. But if it's something simple or just like, yeah, I don't know, just like rounding a variable or something, I might put them in there. Yeah, there's you can also use glue data. But it's essentially just like a beefed up version of paste where you don't have to keep breaking the quotes. That's like the big benefit. And it will first look in your data. So like if you used it in a mutate function, it would first look in your data for that variable, and then it will look in your global environment for the variable, which is, I guess, how mutate would have worked anyways. But yeah. Glue is also vectorized. All right, so we have an example here. Yeah, so you can do all that, and then you can do something like use glue collapse, and you can say last equals Oxford comma space. So I collapse them all. Let's say set equals yeah, I don't know, but the last one is saying and on the end, which is pretty cool.
Okay. That was.
Right, I wanted to just a couple last things. So I did put the answers here. So if you wanted to compare your script to like a version that has all the changes we discussed, that is here. In the dashboard itself, in the Your Turn section, there's tutorials for several things that we didn't go over. If you want to listen to me talk for 10 minutes straight, there's a, well, the tutorial itself is, if you click on that, is a link to the documentation, which is, you know, like one of these guys. But in there is also a video where I like talk through it again if you need any help. But yeah, it will like review like what the steps are and like how to use it. And then yeah, there's a tutorial for Flexdashboard, which I think is a really helpful tutorial. And then Shinyobjects has a bunch of great input. They call them widgets, so input widgets that you can use in your dashboard. So let me just pull that up real fast. So so when we were talking about toggles earlier, so there's like this kind of toggle that you can use. And yeah, it's nice that the person like has it show the code of how it's working, or you want to put like a little thumbs up in there. Yeah, radio buttons. So you can do like checkbox groups where you can select more than yeah, so right now, like all of them are depressed, so you can select multiple B and C, but radio boxes are going to be one at a time. So that's what we were using in our dashboard. But there's a lot of other stuff, like you can put progress bars, you can use picker input, with, which we saw in one of the examples. Yeah, there's a lot of good stuff in there. And then is there anything else from the tutorial? Yeah, I think that's what I most wanted to show you.
Okay, great. It's after 8 now, so I think we're gonna. Thank you so much. This was very helpful.
Glad to hear it. Great. Well, I look forward to seeing more Flex dashboards out in the world. So, thank you.